That swampy patch of yours is an eyesore and a mosquito-infested blight on my community. Her voice, a grating symphony of entitlement honed by years of terrorizing retail workers and school principals, cut through the placid afternoon air. I had been enjoying the quiet hum of a late summer day on my porch, watching the heat shimmer rise from the long grass in my lower field. It was a peace I had earned over 30 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, a peace I had retired specifically to inhabit. Now that peace was being violated by a plus-sized woman in a shockingly tight polo shirt. The logo of the neighboring subdivision stretched precariously over one ample breast. It depicted a single, lonely pine tree, rendered in a style that could only be described as vaguely fascistic. She stood just on her side of the ancient, lichen-covered stone wall that had marked the boundary of my family's land for nearly 2 centuries. Her name, I would soon learn, was Karen Shipley, and she was the self-appointed queen, jury, and executioner of the estates at Whispering Pines, the soulless tract of beige vinyl boxes that had sprouted like fungus on the parcel next to mine 2 years ago. "I'm Karen Shipley, president of the Homeowners Association," she announced, as if presenting credentials to a foreign potentate. "And we, the board, have voted. We've decided that your low-lying field there will be converted into a retention pond. It's for the good of the community. It'll be a beautiful water feature." I took a slow sip of my iced tea, letting the condensation on the glass cool my hand. I had designed and overseen the construction of dams, levees, and canal systems in some of the most unforgiving environments on the planet. I knew more about hydrology and soil mechanics than she knew about breathing. The idea of this woman, whose primary engineering challenge was likely navigating a Costco aisle, lecturing me about a water feature, was profoundly, almost beautifully absurd. "That field," I said, my voice level and calm, "is not a swamp. It's a seasonal floodplain for a spring-fed creek, and it's my property." "Not for long," she chirped, a triumphant, predatory gleam in her eyes. "This is a beautification project. The community bylaws give us broad authority. We're improving the aesthetic value of the entire neighborhood, and your rustic property is dragging us all down. We'll handle the excavation and everything. All you have to do is sign the easement." She held up a sheaf of papers, waving them as if they were a flag of conquest. The arrogance was breathtaking. It was a declaration of war. She had no idea who she had just declared it on. She saw a quiet old man on a porch. She did not see a retired colonel who had managed billion-dollar logistics chains and stared down warlords over contested territory. She saw a swampy field. She did not see Harding's Hollow, a piece of land my great-great-grandfather had bought with his mustering-out pay after the Civil War. A piece of land my blood and sweat were literally mixed with. "This conversation is over," I said, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. I stood up, the old wicker chair groaning in protest. Her face, which had been a mask of condescending pleasantry, curdled into a snarl. "You can't just walk away from me. I am the president. We have a right to a pleasant view. We will get that pond, with or without your cooperation. I will see to it that your property is condemned if I have to." I turned my back on her shrill threats and walked into my house, the screen door slapping shut behind me with a satisfying finality. The war had begun, and the first rule of any campaign is to know your enemy and know your terrain. She had just revealed her objective and her profound ignorance. It was time for me to begin my own reconnaissance. The peace of Harding's Hollow was over. The siege had begun. 3 days later, the first salvo of the paper assault arrived. It was not a simple letter. It was a statement of intent, a carefully crafted piece of bureaucratic intimidation. The envelope itself was made of a heavy, cream-colored cardstock, the kind used for wedding invitations or declarations of state. In the top left corner, the Whispering Pines logo was embossed, its sharp lines pressing into the paper with self-important authority. My name and address were printed in a severe serif font that screamed official business. I slid it open with the blade of my old service knife. Inside, the document was even more pretentious. The same heavy bond paper, with a watermark visible when held to the light. The letterhead proclaimed, "The Estates at Whispering Pines Homeowners Association, Architectural Review and Community Standards Committee." It was a document designed to make a person feel small, to make them feel as if they were up against an ancient and powerful institution, not a gaggle of bored suburbanites with too much time on their hands. The text was a masterpiece of legalistic nonsense. It cited various articles and subsections of their own bylaws, none of which, of course, applied to me or my property. It was addressed to the occupant Harding property, a deliberate depersonalization. I was not a neighbor. I was an obstacle. It listed 3 distinct violations. First, violation of Article 4, Section 2, HT Amrsai, failure to maintain landscaping to community aesthetic standards, referring to my lower field as an unmanaged and overgrown weed lot. The proposed fine was $200. Second, violation of Article 6, Section 5, C, installation of an unapproved water feature without ARC review, referring to the creek that had been flowing through this land since the last ice age. The fine for that was $500. The third was the most audacious. Violation of Article 2, Section 1, failure to comply with Community Development Plan, citing my refusal to grant them the easement for their retention pond project. The fine for that was $1,000, with a note that it would accrue daily. Total fines, $1,700. Payable within 30 days. I read the letter twice. My initial shock, a hot flash of pure rage, subsided almost immediately. It was replaced by something else, something colder and far more dangerous. It was a feeling I recognized from my past life, the slow, dangerous calm that settles over you when the situation becomes critical. It was the clarity that comes when the enemy has overplayed their hand and revealed their exact strategy. They thought they could bury me in paper, intimidate me with fines, and bully me into submission. They had mistaken my desire for peace as a sign of weakness. It was a fatal miscalculation. I walked from my kitchen to my study. The room was lined with books on engineering, history, and geology. In the corner stood a tall, olive-drab footlocker, the same one that had followed me from Fort Belvoir to Germany, to Korea, to Iraq, and back. I knelt and unlatched the heavy clasps. The air that escaped smelled of canvas and old memories. I reached past neatly folded dress uniforms and leather-bound journals and pulled out a brand-new 3-inch D-ring binder. I carried it to my desk and took out a label maker. With precise, deliberate movements, I typed out a title and printed the strip. I peeled off the backing and affixed it to the spine of the binder. Operation. Watershed. Then, I took the violation notice from Karen Shipley, slid it into a clear plastic sheet protector, and opened the binder. With a satisfyingly loud snap, I clipped it into place. It was the first entry in what I knew would become a comprehensive dossier. This was no longer a simple dispute. It was a campaign, and I would plan and execute it with the same meticulous discipline I had applied to every operation of my career. My home was my fortress, and it was now under siege. I would become its defender. The first phase of any operation is intelligence gathering. An enemy's own doctrine is often their greatest weakness. I needed a copy of the HOA's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, their rulebook, their Bible. A quick search of the county's public records website yielded the full document, a sprawling 60-page manifesto of mandated conformity. I printed it out, the warm paper stacking up in the printer tray, and spent the next 2 days doing what I did best, analyzing a complex system for vulnerabilities. I read it with a highlighter in one hand and a red pen in the other, not as a homeowner, but as an analyst breaking down an enemy's order of battle. The language was deliberately convoluted, a tangled thicket of legalese designed to confuse and overwhelm. But beneath the jargon, the structure was simple, and its weaknesses were glaring. I found the section on special assessments for capital improvements. It required a 2/3 majority vote of the entire membership at a specially convened meeting, not a simple vote by the board. It required certified cost estimates from at least 3 different contractors. It required a hydrological survey if the project involved altering drainage patterns. Karen had followed none of these procedures. She was acting like a dictator, wielding authority she did not possess. I highlighted the entire section in yellow. Next, I went on the offensive. My own property was the key terrain, and I needed to fortify my position with unimpeachable documentation. I drove to the county courthouse, a stately old brick building downtown. The records room was in the basement, a quiet, climate-controlled space that smelled of old paper and binding glue. The clerk, a woman with a kind face and tired eyes, pointed me to the plat maps and deed archives. For hours, I unrolled massive, brittle maps that charted the history of this land. I found the original survey from 1872, my great-great-grandfather's name penned in elegant cursive. I saw the lines that defined Harding's Hollow, clear and unchanging through the decades. Then I found the plat map for the estates at Whispering Pines. There it was, in black and white, an undeniable fact etched onto the official county record. A thick, solid line separating their development from my property. My land was not mentioned, not included, not referenced in any part of their legal description. I was adjacent, but I was not a part. I was a sovereign nation. I paid the clerk for certified copies of my deed and both maps. These went into the binder, a new section labeled Territorial Integrity. But the real breakthrough, the discovery of a higher authority, came that evening. As I studied the survey maps, I kept looking at the blue line that snaked through my lower field. It was labeled Harding Creek. On a hunch, I went to the website for the state's Department of Environmental Protection. I navigated through a labyrinth of bureaucratic menus until I found a database of protected state waterways. I typed in Harding Creek. The result hit my screen like an artillery strike. Harding Creek was listed as a designated tributary to the larger Scantic River. Under State Statute 22, A38, any activity that involved diverting, damming, or altering the flow of a designated waterway was strictly regulated. It required a lengthy, expensive permitting process, including an environmental impact study, public hearings, and final approval from the state commissioner. The penalties for violating the statute were severe: fines of up to $25,000 per day and potential criminal charges. Karen Shipley wasn't just planning to build a pond. She was planning to commit a felony. I picked up the phone the next morning. I dialed the number for the DEP's Enforcement Division. The man who answered sounded monumentally bored, his voice a monotone drone. I calmly introduced myself and began to lay out the situation. I described my property, the creek, and the neighboring HOA's plan to excavate a pond and dam the waterway. "Hold on," the bureaucrat said. his voice suddenly sharp, the boredom gone. They sent you a written notice of this? Yes, sir. And a list of fines for my unapproved water feature. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a low whistle. You have got to be kidding me. Ma'am, are you willing to forward me a copy of that notice? It's sir, I corrected him gently. And yes, I can have it in your inbox in 5 minutes. Please do, he said, his voice now filled with a kind of grim excitement. I'm opening a case file right now. This is egregious. I gave him my contact information and the address of the HOA. He gave me a case number. I hung up the phone and felt a slow smile spread across my face. I had found my air support. I had escalated the conflict to a level Karen could not possibly comprehend. She was playing checkers in her little kingdom, while I was maneuvering pieces on a much larger board. I printed out the email I sent to the DEP along with the agent's reply and added them to the binder. Section C, Superior Jurisdiction. With my own position secured, it was time for the next phase, building a resistance. A single complaint can be dismissed as a grudge. A chorus of voices is a movement. I knew from my initial observation of Karen that she ruled by fear. Tyrants always do. And where there is fear, there are victims. I just had to find them. I decided on a simple reconnaissance patrol, a walk through the enemy's territory. I put on a pair of comfortable shoes and strolled into the estates at Whispering Pines. It was even more sterile up close. Every lawn was a perfect green carpet. Every mailbox was identical. Every house was a variation of the same 3 designs in a palette of beige, taupe, and greige. It was a monument to enforced mediocrity. As I rounded a corner, I saw her. Karen was in her element, standing over a trembling, white-haired woman who was kneeling by a flower bed. Karen was pointing an accusatory finger at a small ceramic garden gnome whose cheerful painted smile seemed to be an act of open defiance. Mildred, we've been over this. Karen's voice was loud, carrying across the manicured lawns. Article 9, Section 4B. All lawn ornamentation must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee. That gnome is not on the approved list. It's tacky. It lowers property values. But my grandchildren gave it to me. The woman, Mildred whispered, her voice frail. I don't care if the President of the United States gave it to you. The rules are the rules. You have 48 hours to remove it, or you will be fined. This is your final warning. Karen turned and stormed off, her golf cart whirring away like an angry hornet. I waited a moment, then walked over to the woman. Excuse me, ma'am, I said gently. I'm John Harding. I live in the old house over the hill. She looked up, her eyes watery. Oh, Mildred Gable. I'm sorry you had to see that. It's just a gnome. It's your gnome on your property, I said. My name is John. Would you be willing to talk to me about this later? I think we may have a common interest. A flicker of hope, quickly extinguished by fear, crossed her face. I don't want any more trouble. The only way to stop a bully, I said, my voice low and steady, is to stand up to them. But you don't have to do it alone. I gave her my phone number. She tucked it into the pocket of her gardening apron. It was a start. A seed of rebellion had been planted. 2 days later, Mildred Gable called me. Her voice was stronger, tinged with anger. She had received an official fine notice for the gnome. We arranged to meet. She came to my house, bringing a folder thick with papers. For 3 years, Karen had been terrorizing her. Fines for having her trash cans out 10 minutes too early. Fines for her shutters being a slightly unapproved shade of green. Fines for cracks in her driveway. It was a systematic campaign of harassment. I listened patiently, took notes, and made copies of every violation notice. Each one was another round of ammunition. Mildred told me about the Martinez family, a young couple with 2 small children who were constantly being cited for their kids' toys being left in the yard or for the basketball hoop in their driveway. I paid them a visit next. At first they were wary. They were young, just starting out, and afraid of losing their home over legal fees. But as I laid out my own situation, showing them the certified plat maps and the correspondence from the DEP, I saw their fear begin to turn to anger. They too had a folder of ridiculous fines. I documented everything. The binder, Operation Watershed, was growing thick. It was no longer just about my land. It had become a chronicle of petty tyranny, a testament to the abuse of power. I now had allies. My small insurgency was taking shape. But to launch a decisive counteroffensive, I needed more than just anecdotal evidence. I needed professional firepower. It was time to call in the cavalry. It was time to hire a lawyer. I didn't want just any lawyer. I needed a specialist, someone who understood the unique dynamics of this kind of conflict. I searched online for law firms that specialized in property law and homeowner association disputes. I found a firm downtown with a partner named Marcus Thorne. His biography was what caught my eye. Before entering private practice, he had served for 12 years in the Army's Judge Advocate General's Corps. He was a retired major. He would speak my language. I made an appointment. The firm's offices were on the top floor of a glass tower, a world away from the dusty records room of the courthouse. The air was cool and smelled of success and expensive leather. Marcus Thorne was a tall, sharp man in a perfectly tailored suit. He had the disciplined posture of a soldier and the watchful eyes of a predator. He greeted me with a firm handshake and led me to a conference room with a panoramic view of the city. "Colonel Harding," he said, his voice a calm baritone. "A pleasure. Your file says you're retired from the Corps of Engineers." "That's right, Major," I replied, acknowledging his rank. A flicker of mutual respect passed between us. "So, what can I do for you, Colonel? A property line dispute?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I lifted the Operation Watershed binder from my briefcase and placed it on the polished mahogany table between us. The sheer heft of it made a solid, satisfying sound. "I believe this will explain the situation," I said. He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. He opened the binder to the first page. For the next 20 minutes, he said nothing. He simply turned the pages, his eyes scanning each document with intense focus. He saw the initial violation notice. He saw the certified plat maps. He saw my highlighted copy of the HOA bylaws. He saw the printouts of the state environmental statutes. He saw the case number from the DEP. He saw the meticulously documented stories of the Gables and the Martinezes, complete with copies of their own fines. When he finally reached the last page, he closed the binder gently. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me, a slow, appreciative grin spreading across his face. "Colonel," he said, tapping a finger on the cover of the binder, "this is magnificent. Most clients come in here with a shoebox full of crumpled receipts and a lot of anger. You've brought me a fully prepared opposition research file. This isn't a binder. This is a kill box." I felt a surge of confidence, the feeling of a plan coming together perfectly. "So you'll take the case." "Take the case?" He laughed, a deep, genuine sound. "Colonel, I would pay you to let me take this case. This is the kind of arrogant, overreaching, procedurally flawed nonsense that JAG officers dream of dismantling. This woman, this Karen Shipley, has not just violated her own bylaws, she's about to violate state and federal law, and she's put it all in writing. He leaned forward, all business now. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to let her walk deeper into the trap. First, we'll send a cease and desist letter. It won't be a polite request. It will be a tactical strike. It will cite every statute she's violating, from county zoning to state environmental law. It will name her and every member of her board personally, reminding them that the HOA's corporate shield doesn't protect them from liability for tortious conduct or illegal acts. It will inform them that a case is already open with the DEP. It will be terrifying. And what do you expect her reaction to be? I asked. Based on your profile, he said, gesturing to the binder. A person like this doesn't respond to reason or threats. They see it as a challenge. She will escalate. She will do something stupid. And when she does, we'll be there to document it. We're not just going to win, Colonel. We're going to annihilate her position so completely that no one in that neighborhood will ever be afraid of a garden gnome again. I left his office feeling 10 feet tall. I had a professional ally, a fellow veteran who understood the mission. The insurgency now had legal air cover. The next move was Karen's. The legal counter-salvo, drafted by Marcus Thorne, was a thing of beauty. It was printed on the law firm's heaviest letterhead, the engraved name carrying the weight of authority Karen's embossed logo only pretended to have. It was sent via certified mail, requiring a signature, ensuring it could not be ignored. A copy went to Karen as president, and individual copies went to each of the 4 other board members at their home addresses. This was a key part of the strategy, to isolate them, to make them understand that this was not some abstract corporate issue. This was personal. The letter was 3 pages of precise, cold, legal fury. It systematically dismantled every claim from their violation notice. It cited the county plat map to establish my property's independence. It quoted their own bylaws regarding the procedures for capital improvements, highlighting their failures to comply. Then came the heavy artillery. It cited State Statute 22A38, explaining in excruciating detail the criminal and civil penalties for tampering with a protected waterway. It included the DEP case number and the name of the enforcement agent assigned to it. The final paragraph was Marcus's coup de grace. It informed the board members that any attempt to levy fines, place a lien on my property, or proceed with their pond project would be met with immediate legal action. It stated that we would not only sue the HOA as a corporate entity, but would also name each board member individually in a suit for damages, alleging breach of fiduciary duty and tortious interference. It was, in military terms, a warning shot fired directly across the bow. As Marcus predicted, Karen's response was not retreat, but escalation. Her ego, it seemed, was incapable of processing a threat she did not personally issue. 2 days after the letters were delivered, a new notice was posted on the community bulletin board. It announced a special meeting of the board to be held in 1 week. The sole agenda item was a vote on a special assessment to fund the Whispering Pines Community Water Feature and Beautification Project. She was ignoring the legal advice. She was ignoring the state investigation. She was charging headlong into the kill box. But her arrogance was mixed with impatience. A week was too long for her to wait to assert her dominance. She decided on a direct action, a show of force to prove that she was the one in charge. This would be her final, critical blunder. It happened on a Wednesday morning. I was in my workshop, sharpening the blade on my chainsaw, when I heard the rumble of a heavy diesel engine. I walked to the window and looked down toward the lower field. There, parked on the road just outside my property line, was a large backhoe on a flatbed trailer. A local excavation company's logo was on the door of the truck. A small crew of 2 men were unchaining the machine. And standing there on the manicured grass of the common area, arms crossed, directing the operation like a wannabe field marshal, was Karen Shipley. I felt that cold calm settle over me again. This was the moment. I took my phone from my pocket, switched it to video record, and placed it in my breast pocket so that the camera was looking out through a small gap. Then I picked up a thin portfolio I had prepared for just this contingency. I walked out of my workshop and down the long, sloping lawn toward the stone wall. The foreman, a burly man with a sunburned neck, had just started the backhoe. The engine roared to life, spewing a cloud of black smoke. He was preparing to drive it off the trailer and onto my land. I didn't shout. I didn't run. I walked at a steady, deliberate pace until I reached the stone wall, about 20 feet from the foreman. I simply stood there and waited. He saw me, a look of annoyance on his face. He throttled the engine down to an idle. "Morning," I said, my voice calm and clear over the engine's rumble. "That's a fine-looking piece of machinery you've got there." "Gotta get this pond dug," he grunted, eager to get on with it. He gestured vaguely toward Karen. "Lady's in a hurry." "I'm sure she is," I said. "But before you move that machine 1 more inch, there are a few things you need to see, for your own protection." I opened the portfolio. The first document I handed him was the certified copy of the county plat map. I pointed to the thick black line. "As you can see from the official county survey, this land is not part of the Whispering Pines HOA. If you bring that machine across this stone wall, you will be committing criminal trespass." His eyes widened slightly. He looked from the map to Karen, a flicker of uncertainty on his face. "Next," I continued, pulling out the second document. "This is a printout from the state's Department of Environmental Protection. The creek you're about to illegally dam is a protected state waterway under Statute 22A38. The fine for doing so is $25,000 a day. That fine applies to the person or company performing the work, not just the person who hired them." I let that sink in. I could see the gears turning in his head. He was a contractor, not an ideologue. He was here to make a living, not to fight a holy war for a crazy HOA president. "Finally," I said, handing him the last sheet. "This is a copy of a letter from my attorney, putting the HOA and its board on notice. We are prepared to file a civil suit for damages against any entity that attempts to alter this property. That includes your company. I'm sure you have liability insurance, but most policies have a clause that voids coverage for illegal activities." The foreman took the papers, his greasy hands trembling slightly. He read them, his lips moving silently. His face went from annoyed to confused, and then to pale with anger. He shut off the backhoe's engine. The sudden silence was deafening. He turned and looked at Karen, who was watching from a distance, her face a mask of impatience. "Ma'am," he shouted, his voice booming across the field, "you need to come here." She waddled over, her expression sour. "What is the delay?" "I am paying you by the hour." "The delay," the foreman said, his voice dangerously low as he shoved the papers into her hand, "is that you hired my company to commit a felony on private property. You lied to us. This job is canceled." Karen's face went through a rapid series of colors, from red to purple. "You can't do that." I have a contract. Our contract has a clause that says the client is responsible for securing all necessary permits and right-of-way. You failed to do that. We're leaving, he said. He turned to his partner. Chain it back down. We're out of here. Karen began to shriek. It was a torrent of insults and threats aimed at me, at the foreman, at the world in general. You will regret this. I will ruin you. This is my community. I am the president. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, a silent witness, while my phone's camera faithfully recorded her entire meltdown. This was the footage that would break her. The foreman and his man ignored her, efficiently securing their machine. Within 10 minutes, they were driving away, leaving Karen alone on the side of the road, screaming at a cloud of dust. She had attempted a direct assault, and it had failed spectacularly. Her authority was not just challenged, it was shown to be a complete illusion. That evening, as I was archiving the video evidence into a new subfolder in Operation Watershed, I heard a soft knock at my front door. It was well after dark, which was unusual. I opened it to find a man standing on my porch, drenched in the yellow glow of the bug light. He was pale and sweating, despite the cool night air. I recognized him from the HOA website. It was Gerald Finch, the treasurer. Colonel Harding? He stammered, clutching a plain manila envelope to his chest like a life vest. I can't be a part of this anymore. What she did today, hiring that crew, she's out of control. I have a family. I can't be sued. I can't go to jail. He looked around nervously, as if expecting Karen to materialize out of the darkness. I saw the lawyer's letter, he continued, his voice barely a whisper. I'm the treasurer. I know where the money is. It's not right. None of it is right. He thrust the envelope into my hands. I wasn't here. You never saw me. Before I could say a word, he turned and practically ran back to his car, disappearing into the night. I closed the door and opened the envelope. Inside was not paper, but a small silver USB drive. The keys to the kingdom, the financial records. This was the smoking gun. Karen's disastrous frontal assault had shattered the morale of her own command staff, and I now had an inside source. The final piece of the puzzle had just been delivered to my door. I plugged the USB drive into my computer. It contained a complete, unredacted record of the HOA's finances for the past 3 years. Bank statements, budgets, invoices, payment records. It was a treasure trove of malfeasance. I spent the next 2 days poring over the data, creating spreadsheets, cross-referencing dates and amounts. A clear and damning pattern quickly emerged. The instrument of Karen's corruption was a line item in the budget labeled Landscape Contingency and Beautification Fund. On the surface, it seemed innocuous, but the payments out of this fund were staggering, and they almost all went to one vendor: Shipley Lawn Care and Design. The invoices were vague, listing services like seasonal planting, mulch refreshment, and aesthetic pruning, always for neat, round sums of money. A quick search of the state's business registry revealed that Shipley Lawn Care and Design was a sole proprietorship registered to a one Daniel Shipley, Karen's cousin. A further search revealed his primary occupation was as a part-time bartender in the next town over. He didn't own so much as a lawnmower. She was embezzling, plain and simple. She was using the HOA's money as her personal slush fund, funneling it to her cousin, who was undoubtedly kicking a portion back to her. The beautification project, to build a pond on my land, wasn't just about power. It was about creating a massive new expense that would allow her to divert even more money. I meticulously organized the evidence: the falsified invoices, the corresponding bank transfers, the business registration for her cousin's shell company. I prepared a simple but devastating slideshow presentation. This was the kill shot. The night of the special meeting arrived. I put on a freshly pressed shirt and a blazer. It felt like putting on a uniform again. I met Marcus Thorne in the parking lot of the community clubhouse. He was carrying a sleek leather briefcase. Inside, I knew, were copies of all our evidence ready for distribution. We were a two-man army, ready for the final battle. We walked inside. The room was packed. Word of the confrontation with the excavation crew had spread like wildfire. The atmosphere was thick with tension and anticipation. I saw Mildred Gable and the Martinez couple sitting near the front. I gave them a slight, confident nod. They were my infantry, ready to provide supporting fire. Karen and her 4 board members were seated at a long table at the front of the room, looking self-important and grim. Gerald Finch, the treasurer, sat among them, looking green. He refused to make eye contact with me. Karen banged a small, plastic-looking gavel. "This special meeting of the estates at Whispering Pines is now in order," she announced, her voice strained. "The sole item on the agenda is the vote for a special assessment to fund the pond beautification project. As you all know, this project is essential for raising our property values and dealing with the unsightly swamp next door." She launched into a slick presentation, complete with glossy architectural renderings of what she was calling Lake Karen. It showed a kidney bean-shaped pond surrounded by weeping willows and park benches. It was a fantasy, and she was selling it hard. "I now open the floor for discussion before the vote," she said, a smug look on her face, clearly expecting no opposition. This was our moment. I stood up. "Madam President," I said, my voice carrying easily through the silent room. "Colonel John Harding, I'd like to address the Assembly." Her eyes narrowed. "You are not a member of this association. You have no standing to speak." "On the contrary," Marcus Thorne said, rising smoothly to his feet beside me. "I am Marcus Thorne, and I am legal counsel for several members of this association. And since my client, Colonel Harding, is the primary subject of this proposed assessment, and his property is the target of the proposed construction, he most certainly has standing. The state's open meeting laws grant him that." Karen was momentarily stunned. She had not anticipated us bringing a lawyer. Checkmate. "Fine," she spat. "You have 5 minutes." "I won't need that long," I said. I walked to the front of the room and connected my laptop to a projector I had brought with me. The first image that flashed on the screen was the certified county plat map. "Let's start with the basics," I began, my voice calm and instructional, as if lecturing a group of cadets. "This is the official map of this subdivision. As you can all see, my property, Harding's Hollow, is not and has never been a part of the estates at Whispering Pines. Your HOA has exactly 0 legal authority over my land." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I clicked to the next slide, the DEP statute. "Furthermore, the creek you propose to dam is a protected state waterway. The project you are about to vote on is illegal. The state has an open enforcement file on this matter, and anyone voting to approve this project could be exposing themselves to significant personal, civil, and criminal liability." The murmurs grew louder. The board members at the front table began shifting uncomfortably in their seats. I saw one of them whisper frantically to the person next to him. "But this isn't just about one illegal project," I continued, my voice hardening. "It's about a pattern of abuse and harassment. I'd like to yield the floor to Mrs. Mildred Gable." Mildred, emboldened, stood up. Her voice, though soft, was filled with a newfound strength. She told the story of the gnome, of the constant fines, of the bullying. When she finished, Mr. Martinez stood and told his story of the basketball hoop and the endless harassment of his children. The personal stories resonated with the crowd. I could see heads nodding. People were recognizing their own experiences. The narrative was shifting. Karen was no longer a stern but fair leader. She was a petty tyrant. "And why?" I asked, turning back to the screen. "Why this obsession with fines and expensive projects? I believe the HOA's own financial records can answer that question." I clicked to the next slide. It was a simple spreadsheet showing the payments from the Beautification Fund to Shipley Lawn Care. The room fell dead silent. I then showed them the business registration for her cousin's shell company. A collective gasp went through the audience. "It appears, Madam President," I said, looking directly at Karen, whose face was now the color of ash, "that this HOA is not being run for the benefit of the community, but as a personal piggy bank." The room erupted. People were shouting, pointing fingers at the board. Karen banged her toy gavel frantically, but the noise was overwhelming. She had lost control completely. This was the moment to spring the trap. I raised my voice over the din. "Madam President, I would like to propose an amendment to the special assessment motion on the floor." The room quieted slightly, eager to see what would happen next. I move to amend the motion," I called out, "such that before any funds are spent on a new project, the HOA will first be required to commission a full, independent forensic audit of the last 3 years of financial records, with the results to be mailed to every single homeowner." It was a brilliant move, crafted by Marcus. Karen was caught. If she and her board voted against an audit, it was a blatant admission of guilt. If they voted for it, they were finished. She was paralyzed, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Before she could recover, Marcus Thorne stepped forward. "Point of order, Madam President," he said, his voice cutting through the remaining chatter like a razor. "Given the evidence of potential financial malfeasance and gross negligence presented here this evening, which exposes every member of this association to legal risk, a motion for a vote of no confidence, and the immediate removal of the entire board is in order." Mr. Martinez leaped to his feet. "I second that motion." "All in favor of removing the board," someone shouted from the back. A forest of hands shot into the air. A deafening roar of "Aye" filled the room. It was a tidal wave of righteous anger, a full-blown rebellion. Karen Shipley stared out at the sea of hostile faces, her face a grotesque mask of shock and disbelief. Her reign was over. Her little kingdom had crumbled. She shoved her chair back, screamed an incoherent string of curses, and stormed out of the room, her sycophantic board members trailing in her wake like pilot fish. They were swept away by the tide of a community that had finally found its voice. The room erupted in cheers and applause. The siege was broken. The tyrant was deposed. In the chaotic but jubilant aftermath of the meeting, a new interim board was elected on the spot. It was composed of reasonable people, including a relieved-looking Mildred Gable and an energized Mr. Martinez. Their first official act, passed by unanimous acclamation, was to void every fine levied by Karen's board over the past year. Their second was to draft a formal written letter of apology to me and my family for the harassment and the attempt to seize our land. The following week, Marcus Thorne, acting on behalf of the new board, turned over the entire Operation Watershed binder, along with the contents of the USB drive, to the district attorney's office. An official investigation was launched into Karen Shipley's tenure as president. Within a month, she and her cousin were indicted on multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. Faced with a mountain of evidence, she pleaded guilty. To pay the court-ordered restitution to the HOA and cover her legal fees, she was forced to sell her beige vinyl box of a house and move away in disgrace. The change in the estates at Whispering Pines was immediate and palpable. The oppressive atmosphere of fear lifted like a morning fog. Garden gnomes of all shapes and sizes began to appear on lawns, a small, colorful rebellion. The Martinez children's basketball hoop was reinstalled, and the happy sounds of kids playing filled the afternoons again. The community, once cowed into silent conformity, began to breathe. They started talking to each other, reintroducing themselves as neighbors rather than potential rule breakers. 2 months after the fateful meeting, the new board organized a community barbecue in the common area, right by the stone wall that marked my property line. They invited me as the guest of honor. I accepted, not as a conqueror, but as a neighbor. I brought a cooler of iced tea and a watermelon from my garden. People I had never met came up to shake my hand, to thank me. I was no longer the strange old man in the historic house. I was the man who had shown them they didn't have to be afraid. I was Colonel Harding, the liberator of the gnomes. It was a title I wore with a certain quiet pride. Mr. Martinez, the new HOA president, made a short speech and presented me with a symbolic gift. The broken plastic gavel Karen had left behind, mounted on a small plaque. We all had a good laugh. Now, as autumn paints the leaves of the great oaks and maples in fiery colors, peace has returned to Harding's Hollow. I sit on my porch, just as I did on that day the war was declared. The late afternoon sun slants across the lower field, the long grass waving gently in the breeze. The creek murmurs its ancient, constant song. Nothing has changed here, and yet everything is different. The Operation Watershed binder sits on a shelf in my study, a silent testament to the campaign. I had considered taking it apart, shredding the documents, but I decided against it. It serves as a reminder that peace is not a passive state but an active one, something that must be defended. It's a reminder that tyranny, whether on a grand scale or in the petty kingdom of a homeowners association, thrives on the silence and fear of good people. And it's a reminder that it can be defeated with truth, with discipline, and with the simple, unwavering courage to stand your ground on the land that is yours. The wind rustles the pines, and for the first time in a long time, the only sound I hear is peace. A profound, hard-won peace.